Hey guys, Brooke and Laura here today for Legal Talk Tuesday, and today is our estate planning week. As you guys know, usually we will do a family law topic, then we will do a business law topic, an estate planning topic, and then whatever we feel like doing on our random week. But today specifically, and unfortunately, we're going to talk about funeral planning, pre-planning specifically. Over the weekend, my grandfather passed away. And when my family was going to, make the arrangements with the funeral home, they had shown me this really, really like 1951, really old prepaid policy. And being that it's been a decade that I've been practicing, I've seen this several times, and it usually does not play out well, people that hold those policies. And so when they went to plan, I said, okay, let me know, give me a call, something. I didn't want to scare them, but, if you have any issues, well, of course they get a call because they're having an issue. And this prepaid policy, they're, really not going to pay anything. And they're not really honoring what it says. So that kind of solidified our topic for this week for you guys, just because it's kind of fresh on our mind. And it's something that happens frequently enough that if you either, you or a relative has a, policy already in place, or if you're looking to get a policy, we kind of want to help you look at some of the things you need to kind of be aware of and look out for, because funerals are really one of the biggest expenses that consumers are going to make in their lifetime. They cost thousands of dollars. I think on average, I saw something like $7,000 to $10,000. So, and oftentimes individuals are going to pre-plan their funeral, or at least their expenses and how that's going to be handled, just to kind of ease the burden on their families. And then for the folks that qualify for Medicaid and SSI payments now, later, whatever, prepayment of burial expense is actually a way to invest in an asset that will not count against either of those benefits for you. So that's really important. It's really good to talk to someone, an attorney that can help you with that, especially before it's a problem, because when it becomes a problem, it's a big problem. And Medicaid and SSI are very particular on how you spend your money, but this is one way that you can do that. So it's really important to be informed. It's important to be aware of how your pre-need funeral funds are spent and managed. Just to start this out as a Debbie Downer, some of the things that could go wrong that you need to be aware of. So you could actually lose money because the funds are misspent over the lifetime of that investment. Also, the funeral provider themselves could mishandle, mismanage, or even embezzle funds. Sometimes the businesses actually go out of business before the need to fund those policies arises. That's kind of what happened in our situation. It was a really old home, and a bigger franchise home bought them out, and they were still honoring the policies, but only under their very strict terms. And these people holding these policies were not aware. So that happens, especially for older policies, but that could happen now too. And some of these policies really sell virtually worthless, policies. They're not worth anything. So those are four of the main things that could go wrong when you are doing some pre-need funeral expense planning and purchasing policies.
So we want to talk about the fact that there are some protections that you have as a consumer. And consumers received some protection from the really unscrupulous funeral providers with the creation of the funeral rule in 1984. This rule, administered by the FTC, Federal Trade Commission, requires that funeral providers give consumers accurate, itemized price information and other specific disclosures about funeral goods and services. Unfortunately, the federal rule does not apply to many of the features of pre-need contracts, which are governed solely by state law. So that's a big thing to kind of keep in mind when you're talking about pre-planning versus post-death planning. And protections really vary widely from state to state when you're talking about those post-planning, options. Pre-planning options. Some states' laws require that the funeral home or a cemetery place a percentage of the prepayment in a state-regulated trust, similar to kind of what attorneys do, for when it's actually needed versus when they want to take it. or to purchase a life insurance policy with the death benefits assigned to the funeral home or cemetery. So that's something that some state laws do. Other states, however, offer buyers of pre-need planning little or no effective protection.
Right. And so before you sign up for a policy, or if you actually, have one in place right now, there are several questions that the FTC recommends, but here are just a few of the things that you're going to want to ask. You're going to ask what happens to the money that you've prepaid. So again, like Laura said, states have different requirements for handling funds paid for prearranged funeral services. So you'll just want to make sure that you're very clear on what that covers. You want to know what happens to the interest income on money that is prepaid and then put into that trust account that she mentioned. You're going to want to know that. You also want to know if you're protected if the business that you're dealing with actually goes out of business, which, again, if someone else buys them, they may not have to necessarily honor your policy. So you want to make sure that you know what that process is in case they go out of business. You also want to know if you can cancel the contract and get a full refund if you change your mind. Hopefully it says that very clearly in your policy, but sometimes these are not super clear, especially when you're looking at something from 1951. But you want to make sure that you know your options for cancellation and refunds. And also you want to know what happens if you move to a different area or if you die while away from home. Because some of these prepaid funeral plans can be transferred, but then there's an added cost. You want to know what those costs are because it may not be practical, especially if you've moved or if you are somewhere else when you pass, to actually be able to come all the way back to maybe a specific home that they require you to go to for them to, for the policy to kick in. So those are a few of the primary questions that you need to ask that are going to affect you in your policy.
There are some other steps that you can take to protect yourself. The first one is find out exactly what you're paying for and compare it with other funeral providers. It's kind of like with anything, don't pick the first place, shop around and compare and, find out those exact details that Brooke was talking about and make a list and compare, at least 2 different options so that you can pick what fits best for you. Make sure the price is locked in and that any additional money won't be required at the time of death. That's a big one too. I think we've all experienced that either ourselves or with someone that we know where it may not be funeral costs, but it might be something else where you think there's one price and additional money is gonna, be required at some point. It's kind of why we function as a law firm the way that we do. We like to be transparent about our flat fee. You're only gonna pay this amount of money for our services. So make sure that you have that locked in price with the funeral home with that policy. And you're gonna have to shell out additional money after the person is deceased. Be sure to tell your family about the plans that you've made. You'd be surprised how many people don't. Let your family know where all the documents are filed so that they can easily find things after you've passed away. It's the same thing with pretty much all the estate planning things that we talk about is make sure you discuss it with your family so they know your wishes, know where everything is. Another thing is to set up a payable on death account. So sometimes you'll see it called a POD account with your bank. Make the person who will be handling your funeral arrangements the beneficiary and make sure that they know your plans, kind of like what I said before. It's, if you've got maybe your daughter is the most practical or I think Brooke and I experienced that a little bit. Sorry, brothers and sisters, but we tend to be the ones who are the responsible ones in our family. So we're the ones who get asked to do things like this. And so make sure that they are the beneficiary and that they know exactly how to use that money that's in your account that's payable on death. You will maintain control of that money while you're alive. So it's not like you're giving it to them right now, but when you die, it's immediately available to them without having to go through probate in order to pay for the funeral costs. Another thing is if you have issues or questions about your state's laws, most states have a licensing board that regulates the funeral industry, and you can talk with them, ask them questions. There's going to be somebody there that will help consumers to figure out, what they can do, what they have kind of in their back pocket. So those are just some other ways that you can protect yourself right now.
Yeah, and thank you guys for joining us today. Again, this was kind of fresh on my mind because I've been dealing with it since he passed on Sunday and working all of it out. I think we've got it handled, but it's really stressful. It's not something you want your family to have to deal with when they're, already grieving and trying to make other arrangements. So if you have a policy, if you're getting a policy, revisit your policy, ask questions. The more that you can do for your family, the easier that it's going to be when the time comes. For them to actually, put these things in. So, like I said earlier, we don't know what we're talking about next week because it's our wild card week. So we will just surprise you all, but we're here every Tuesday for Legal Talk Tuesday at 11:30 a.m. Central Time. And thank you guys for joining us, and hopefully we see you next week.